everybody, and welcome to week 5. I'm your host, Michael Betker, and I'll be taking you through this week's lecture on J364 Online, Ad and PR Account Management. So let's proceed. Quickly, here's kind of what we'll be doing or talking about this week. First, we'll just give an update on some things that are due and talk about this week. We are going to be delving into the reading material called Hitting the Sweet Spot. And for your convenience, I actually took some time, and for those of you who didn't get that book, I scanned the first 5 chapters just in case, so you can find that in this week's folder for Canvas. We'll do that, and then we'll talk about how to come across insights, because the sweet spot really talks about those insights and what they can mean for a brand, good or bad. So we'll talk about that, and then we'll talk about a technique called laddering, which is pretty cool and actually something I want you guys to think about. But this is something we would do as an agency member. And frankly, the account person would be the one who would drive a lot of those insight-driven discussions. So we'll talk about that, and that'll be our week here. So let's proceed. A couple things quickly. Obviously, Brand Update 2 is due this week on Thursday, and then a discussion post number 3 is now up. And that is, again, requiring that you watch another episode of The Pitch. And this time we're focusing on brand from last week. So the company Clockwork has employed the pitching services of 2 agencies. And I'd like you to watch that one and comment on that. Let me know if you have any questions on that one. And, of course, I think most people have their book selections in already. And I think I've approved most people with a couple of exceptions. If you haven't gotten your book selection in, please strive to do that ASAP. That's coming up awfully quick. So you have my blessings if you've put your time in there. Now, obviously, it's a little bit different. Usually I teach this face-to-face, this class, and we have in-class presentations. So a little bit different. So I've busted you guys out into little groups where you'll be required to record yourself presenting and within these little groups digitally. So what that means basically is if you've ever taken 110 online here at UWW, it's very similar to how we handle it there. You'll be required to have 4 people in your audience. You want to turn the camera and show the folks who are watching you pitch the book to simulate an audience like you would have normally. And then, of course, turn back to you. And what you really want to do is create a presentation summary that takes people through the book, the highlights of the book, and kind of your take on the content. A couple things I want to say is just some tips for you guys. Don't wait till the very end to read the book and then try to slap together your presentation. Generally, that doesn't go very well for most people. How I would handle this is I would start, now you've got approvals for your book, I would read each chapter, and each chapter could get a slide. Now, if you've got 50 slides, or 50 chapters rather, that doesn't make much sense. But let's say you got a more reasonable 10 to 15 chapters. You could make a slide for each chapter if you wish. As you're reading the book is how I would do that. And what that does is obviously it solidifies in your mind kind of the content so that you are able to speak extemporaneously, which is the goal, right? We want you to speak conversationally versus reading from a slide. So that's one thing I'll be looking for as well as a part of your grading. So the other piece that's not on here, I would say just practice. Now, obviously, once you get to a point where you're ready to go, before you record this thing for real, no editing allowed. Please just get in there and let it happen. But certainly practicing a few times will certainly help your presentation skills. And obviously here in Ad and PR Account Management, we are account people. And one of the core strengths of a good account person is the ability to present themselves intelligently, and by extension, their company, or their agency. Like I said, for audience members, I'd like you to turn the camera to them, and then of course turn the camera back to you. And somehow you guys got to find a way to illustrate your your slides, so that we can follow along. So make your slides visible on camera as you review your book. Now you can have your laptop in front of you and kind of show, in front of the camera. So as you click, you can show kind of each slide. But would also like I've provided a spot for you guys to publish in a separate folder your finished product, your finished presentation. So that'll help me kind of follow along as well. So we'll give it a shot here. I think obviously your best faith effort is what I'm asking for here. Good luck. Have fun with that. We're looking for, obviously, your deep dive into each of these books. I want to quickly talk about the personal brand exercise, which I have not graded yet, but we'll get to that this week. Thank you for doing that. If you've turned that in, if you haven't turned that in, get that in for a reduced point value, but it's still, I would still accept it right now. I'd like you to make sure you do this. This is super important for us. And we're going to talk about this today quite a bit, this first portion. But it's your personal brand exercise, all right, and mapping your unique value. And why we do that? Well, here's the reason why. Ultimately, maybe you guys haven't thought about yourselves as brands per se yet. It's funny because quick story on this. When I first started working in advertising and marketing long ago as a young buck, I didn't think about myself in such a way. In fact, I didn't really do a lot of self-reflection at all early on in my life, which I've shored up quite a bit. But I had a boss who kind of told me that my brand was a brand, and that if I came late or wasn't dressed appropriately or all of these things, that I was doing probably not correctly, spoke to my brand, and people kind of tended to brand you, frankly, based on your behavior. So I'd say the first thing here is to find your unique strengths, and that's what we're trying to do here with this brand book. So take the time to do that. And it's a work in progress, right? So you're going to have this thing, you'll get a grade on it, but it doesn't mean you can't change it. In fact, it's encouraged to do that. As you change, you should kind of update this stuff. But what do you stand for? And it starts up by knowing yourself. And the dark side of that is, obviously, we know our strengths are. Maybe we do, maybe we don't. Maybe we're kidding ourselves. But either way, it's knowing those things we're not so good at as well. So knowing yourself helps you overcome those issues and areas that you need to work on. So why know yourself? A couple things here. First, do you know yourself, the good, the bad, and the ugly? That's kind of what I was talking about there. You are only as good as your biggest weakness, and that's a very truthful statement there. So if you've got, for example, I'll give you an example of my life. Early on in my life, and I'm still not the best, most organized person in the world. However, I did realize that as being a problem for me. I tended to be a bit scattered as a young person in the field, so I've really shored that up through classes and a different way of thinking, but I've now made that a strength. So I'm much more organized than I ever was back in the day. So that was my big weakness. I had others as well, but that was the big one that I could point out to you guys here. And maybe that's true for you. Maybe that's a strength for you in other areas or things you need to work on. So take, honest take, the good, the bad, and the ugly in who you are and what you stand for is important. And second, self-awareness builds confidence. The more you know about yourself, the more, like, for example, I know that I'm a pretty creative person. Like, there's not many people I've met, and this is going to sound cocky, but who I think can come up with a better, more strategic, creative execution than myself. So I feel pretty confident in my skills that way. And it's certainly knowing that, and then also knowing my weaknesses. For example, the fact that I said, I struggle with being organized, or have traditionally done so, is areas where I would want to keep working. The third one here is self-awareness boosts identity. So it forces you to kind of take stock in where you should be in your life and doing the things that really fire you up. And this is, again, a wink and a nod to the Scott Dinsmore video you guys should have watched last week about finding your true identity and finding out who you are as a person, what makes you really excited. What would you do that would make you realize that time is melting away? And that's kind of the key there. And finally, it'll enable you to be the best you can be. So living in a vacuum and doing things kind of without taking stock in yourself is not a good way to live life. So anyway, know thyself. Last thing I want to say about a couple things I want to say about personal brand. This is cool. Your smile is your logo. Your personality is your business card. And how you leave others feeling after an experience with you becomes your trademark. And I would say that's especially true when you're working in an account position, because you are always on and you're always interacting with both teammates and multiple personalities on the agency side. And then, of course, certainly on the client side, you've got that chance to make a good impression. And you've heard the statement, you never get a second chance to make a first impression, right? I think that's a deodorant, Head and Shoulders ad. But anyway, certainly your personal brand is on display from the minute you meet somebody. So last slide on this here. What is my brand? What are my goals? How can my expertise help others? And how do I want to represent myself? Are all questions you should be asking. And this assignment was meant to get at some of those questions. So hopefully you guys found some value in that. I want you to think about yourselves as brands moving forward. And then let's talk about this. This is my pivot slide here. We're going to pivot from that to the readings that I've had you guys look at over the last couple of weeks here. And again, like I said, for your convenience, I put this into week 5 bucket in Canvas for you guys to. It's not the best scan of it, but it's readable. So anyway, but obviously knowing yourself is a first clue, right? Now we do research in the class, and today we're going to talk about brand research in a big way, but you can often, the cheapest research is kind of taking stock in your own self. And I say this in other classes, but there's 80 million plus millennials in this country right now. Now you guys are by and large probably Gen Z. But know this, when you graduate, you'll probably still be catering to folks who are in the millennial bucket. So 80 million plus people, lots of brands, lots of companies, most in fact, want to find a way to reach out to those folks. So it's important to understand them. And by extension, I would say knowing yourself certainly can give you a lot of clues as to how to go about reaching out to those folks in a meaningful way through insight. So we'll talk about that today, but learning how to read yourself before you begin reading consumers is the key. And there's two valuable benefits by doing this, right? You will, number one, learn how to observe the little things. And that's a lot of times, again, people kind of walk through life unaware of the surroundings and about what's going on with people. Now, for me, I've always been I've always been interested in advertising, kind of how people take things in and why things work or don't work, even from an early age. But, maybe you're not doing that now. Currently, I would say start, casting a wider net and thinking more broadly and being more observant about the little things that brands do or don't do. The second one here, you will have a starting point, a rough outline for navigating through others' experiences with a product. And that's the other thing, too. When you start working with an agency and by extension with a client company who has a brand or a host of brands, you are going to want to dig in and dig deep to understand kind of what people are, how they're experiencing the brands or products you're working with. And the key takeaway here is if you want to understand your customers, the best place to start is by understanding yourself. So there's my pivot slide there from your brand to the brands you'll work with. All right, so we're going to talk next about gathering insights, and that's what this Hitting the Sweet Spot book is all about. Now, it's a bit dated, so some of the examples they use are maybe from movies and popular culture that you may not recognize, so I'll do my level-headed best to explain those to you. But we are in the business of finding these insights, and especially these days, when you see any new campaign come out that's successful, it's often built foundationally on what are known as insights. These consumer insights are really these truths that kind of spring out from research. Now, we'll talk more about research, but it's not the kind of research you're thinking maybe. It's not the stuff that you can find in the library necessarily. It's a deeper dive into consumer insights that maybe your competitors don't have access to because they're not thinking the same way you are. But I'm asking you here to cast a wide net, and the big idea is the goal here, and here's some examples of ways to get there. Consumer insights, obviously, and we'll talk about that at length today. Market insights, so in other words, what's going on within your category, what's happening in the world that's impacting the sales of business. Culture insights, certainly, what's happening culturally right now. Obviously, there's a lot of interesting things happening with the Me Too movement recently, and obviously lots of going on in politics. So all of that stuff informs decision-making with consumers. And how does your brand stack up with what's happening currently? Brand insights, certainly within the context of your brand. And we'll talk about brand today a lot, and we'll talk about Reebok versus Nike and kind of the rise and fall of Reebok and kind of some of the brand insight misses that Reebok had along the way that caused them to lose their mantelpiece as the number one shoe brand in the country, in the world, in fact. Product insights, certainly that's a big one as well. So if you got innovation, how do you leverage that and how do consumers feel about that innovation? We'll talk more about that. Future insights. Certainly, what's going on? What's around the corner now? There's a lot of futurists out there who tend to know or seem to think they know. And obviously, you're sometimes wrong, sometimes right, but there's certain things you can do to really extrapolate a potential future, a likely future based on research. Usage insights. And a lot of times when people use products, you get really cool insights as to what happens with the user in the moment when they're using the products themselves. Certainly, purchase insights. What's the experience at the point of retail? And we call that the point of contact with the brand. And then, of course, owner insights. Once you've bought the products, what's it like to have the product over time? All of these and many, many more can lead to these big ideas that we as marketers and advertisers really want to kind of resonate to with our planning. I've used this in other classes, so if you have me in other classes and you've seen this, I'm going to play this quickly. But this is good. I think a really good example of insight-driven media use. The Dove campaign for Real Beauty, this is the insight that they uncovered through their research. And not a shocker, really. 80% of women feel worse about themselves after reading a woman's magazine. And why is that? Well, we kind of make a guess there, but obviously any person in these magazines are like impossibly perfect. And we know Photoshop can do a lot of great things, can remove love handles, wrinkly lines, and double chins, and make you look fresher and younger, and all that stuff, and thinner, certainly. And that's the stuff that people read on a daily basis. That leads to making them look in the mirror and say, gosh, I do not measure up. So that's a huge insight, and that's kind of what the genesis of this Dove campaign for Real Beauty builds this campaign around. Communication planning works best when it's informative and adds to the creative insight process. So that's what they did here. Let's play this little clip here. This is the ad called Insight. Oh, no, rather called Onslaught. Sorry. Good call to action. And the Dove Self-Esteem Fund. So really tapping into that emotional sort of aspect of our marketing. So let's get back on track here. All right. So that's insights that guide media use. And obviously you see this video in numerous places. It's a longer form video, but this certainly ties in with this idea that 80% of women feel bad about themselves. So here comes Dove to the rescue. Another example, a little bit dated, but this is back from '98, and the Bill Clinton campaign, which, quick understanding of this kind of gives you a clue as to how this can really help a campaign for politics. And we're coming up on another big cycle here, big election cycle this November. It should be really interesting to watch how that unfolds. But the Trump campaign, and of course whomever wins on the Democratic side, will be employing a lot of these tactics that were started back in '98 with Clinton, and then kind of built upon by Obama. And now I would say the Trump campaign, a guy by the name of Brad Parscale, who is kind of managing the media for Trump, has really pushed the envelope and done some amazing things with media and social media, frankly. But what they do a lot of times is they look into these, they look under the hood, and they look really deep into the electorate. Those folks who will vote or maybe won't vote, but either way maybe could vote. And Clinton back in '98 kind of started this trend, micro-trending. It's back in '96, he targeted the soccer moms, which was a really good idea, actually. There's a micro-trend is really essentially this group of people, has to be around 3 million or more, or about 1% of the U.S. population back then. And what they did was they focused on these soccer moms who were, mostly pro-Obama, and messaged directly to them. And these folks then became advocates for the Clinton campaign, and that was one of the key reasons why Clinton beat a sitting president. George Bush Sr. was coming off the Gulf War, and it was with an 80+% approval rating. And if you remember, soccer moms really care a lot about the economy, and that kind of drove their discussion around a tagline or a statement they made, which was, quote, "It's the economy, stupid," end quote. And that was James Carville sort of coining that phrase based on this microtrend. So really kind of a clarion call for these soccer moms, who then went out and spread the word on behalf of Clinton. And of course, we know what happened, right? George Bush Sr., sitting president with 80% approval rating, was unseated by the upstart Clinton. And the rest, as they say, is history. Another thing I want to mention too is gaming trends. So we talk about gaming. This is kind of an aside, but I just love the Wii We have one. I have several now actually, and I buy them on eBay or places where they're used, just because I love the system and the games. We've got 100 games probably at my house, but love the idea of that. But one thing I noticed back then even was this trend where lots of folks outside of your normal pattern were using the Wii, playing games for the first time ever. My dad, for example, and moms even. There's a high percentage of folks 45 and older who play the Wii or used the Wii back in the day. So another example of that I would use to leverage my media planning and advertising. Coming up with insights can be challenging, as we'll see. So we're looking for clues about when, where, and how consumers can be influenced. We want to cast a wide net. But again, looking for these kind of clues through some of the folks who you're targeting is the key. So why would you do it? Again, this is kind of a slide about why consumer insights are so important. You can enter new markets with a cool insight. So a lot of times you get a product that's good, but you don't know how it fits. Just because you can make a new innovation doesn't mean you should do it, right? We want to make sure people will actually find it interesting and want to pay for it. But sometimes a new innovation within a category can help you enter that market in a meaningful way, in a big way. Developing advertising materials, certainly consumer insights will help you do that. We'll get feedback a lot of times through focus groups and other means to kind of revise and tweak our advertising materials. Certainly innovation is a key, right? So a lot of times you can do consumer research and focus groups and other things that lead to cool innovations based on comments we get from the folks that we work with, from consumers. Top right, measure performance of products and or services. Certainly that's goes without saying, but we get a lot of like metrics that help us kind of tweak and refine. And we can optimize our marketing strategy and also develop great products and services based on feedback from consumers. So these are really important for the lifeblood, and we'll see kind of some examples of both positive and negative coming up here. So insight over analysis, right? Here's the thing I want to say. Insight's incredibly important, right? And the problem is we're taking data and looking for insights. The problem is we are just literally awash with data these days. Lots of statistics everywhere. So the challenge for us is to kind of tease through that and find those nuggets of truth, those insights that lead to these bigger ideas. The big thing I would say is using the same syndicated data that all your competitors have will lead to the same strategies and solutions. So if you're going in and expecting to use MRI data that's current, but also accessible by your competitors, that's not going to lead to any really big aha moments or big insights as much as maybe doing some original research and doing some primary research in and around your brand, asking folks specific questions that you can then take and use on your own. So unique insights are the key, and that's the secret sauce for any groundbreaking media plan or advertising plan. Good example of this, right? Back in the day, and I don't know if you guys have ever seen Pretty Woman, great movie, certainly a time-honored classic now, but it didn't have a great start. In fact, if you look at the Pretty Woman movie, all kinds of false starts with different actors and things like that, and frankly, even almost wasn't made because of the context of the movie. They didn't believe the movie itself was going to be popular. But remember last week when we talked about branding, we talked about personas, and we talked about kind of higher order emotional qualities of brands. Pretty Woman really is another way of stating the time-honored classic Cinderella. And it's rags to riches and being acknowledged for your beauty and your inner strength and all that stuff that Julia Roberts' character experienced with Richard Gere's character. So really, that taps into this really deep-seated emotional sort of play that the movie was able to tap into, that frankly they were surprised by. And now it's like one of those movies that you could watch over and over again, and I think lots of folks do that. But that movie kind of stumbled into what I would say is a real insight. Kind of the dark side of this here, and this article, Hitting the Sweet Spot, can also have a dark side. And with Marlboro, just cutting to the chase here. Now, this is the Marlboro Man right now. Obviously, Marlboro built their brand around this cowboy mystique. So, if you had to say, all right, which brand fits this mystique? Certainly, Marlboro has painted that picture in a big way. And there was early on, there was no belief that wasn't going to have any difference at all, but it turns out it really did. In fact, there were like multiple Marlboro men, or the Marlboro Man had been fulfilled by numerous actors over the years, many of whom, if you read through the article here, ultimately ended up dying from lung cancer. It's not funny, but obviously this example here, one of the Marlboro men said, "Tobacco will kill you," and I am living proof of it. He's no longer living, obviously, with lung cancer. So sometimes the dark side of this stuff is that we are playing with people's emotions and their deep-seated sort of beliefs and things, and we like to kind of emulate the brands we see. So there's something to be mindful about there. Now, obviously, tobacco companies don't do this as much anymore, but you still see this. People still smoke cigarettes, and now vaping is all the rage, and I'm not sure how they position some of the products there, but it's the same kind of problem. But Marlboro did a really good job, quote-unquote good, in a bad way, with their branding and these insights. Missing the sweet spot now. Actually, XFL is relaunching again, and this is kind of going to illustrate my point here. But the XFL, I'm just going to talk about the XFL, and then we'll talk about Reebok a little bit as well. But if we don't dig deep enough, we don't get to the truth of our brands. So the XFL, the first launch was 7 years ago, I believe, something like that. And actually, I advertised it with the XFL when it first came out. We had this is back when I first started doing promotion some time ago, and we used the XFL because it was inexpensive, and I placed some ads, local ads, on the XFL. And as we know, the first round of XFL was a pretty big, colossal failure, I would say. And Vince McMahon, that's the guy there who's pictured, they just relaunched again, and it's much more successful. And I would say this is because they spent time doing consumer research, a lot of time. So they pulled football fans up and down, back and forth, who obviously the only experience has been largely the NFL, right? And they've basically taken that information and made a game that satisfies the research insights they gleaned from those conversations with football fans. So let's see. I'd say early on, the first weekend was just this past weekend, and they had 3.5 million people watching the show. So that's a good sign that they're doing something correct. So a couple other examples I'll give you here. Classic fails: Plymouth Laser versus Mitsubishi Eclipse. Same exact car, different ways of approaching this, and you'll read the article on this. I'm not going to belabor this, but same product, same car in both cases, but one was positioned differently slightly because it did a better job of understanding the consumers and had way more success. I don't know if you guys are old enough to remember this, probably not, but when I was a kid, New Coke came out. And that was a huge mistake that Coke made. They messed with the formula and caused a lot of people to be really upset by that. Quickly dispensed with New Coke and came back and they called it Classic Coke then. That's one of those historical brand hiccups that people talk about in our industry. We talked about the XFL. Let's talk more about Reebok in more detail, the UBU campaign. I guess the takeaway here is you sink or swim based on how well you know your consumers. So think like your consumer as much as possible. Let's watch this quickly here. This is Reebok's first UBU ad, and this is back in '81, I believe, when this one came out. Oh, no, '88, sorry.
From 70 plus channels. YouTube TV. Start streaming now.
Also would be a man, must be a nonconformist. A foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds. To be great is to be misunderstood. There is a time in every man's education when he arrives at the conviction that envy is ignorance. Insist on yourself, never imitate. To believe that what is true for you in your private heart is true for all men. That is genius.
All right, so that ad came out around the same time Nike was making some big ads. Let's take a look at a Nike ad quickly and compare that around the same time frame.
So you want to get in shape. And you can't decide between running. So you want to get in shape. Cycling. You can't decide between cycling, basketball, tennis, aerobics. So you want to get in shape. Running. And you can't decide between tennis, cycling, weights, volleyball, basketball, aerobics, weights, running, cycling, tennis, volleyball. You don't. Just do it. Tennis, just do it. Just do it. Just do it. Just do it. And it wouldn't hurt to stop eating like a pig either.
Okay, so that's Nike's offering there around the same time frame. So these two brands are competing, right? And prior to Nike's entrance in a big way, you had And by the way, we'll watch this. I'm not going to play this. I'll put this in there for you guys to watch. The 12-minute video, kind of take you through some of the stuff I'm going to talk about quickly here. I owned this shoe. This is back, I forget when exactly, but this is when they were really, really popular. And Reebok started out in '79 in a big way here in the States, and built their massive empire, shoe empire, and they were number one for the longest time around the aerobics craze. Now, aerobics turns out was kind of a fad. Now, obviously, now we got CrossFit today, which is a version of that. But this shoe was, what was it called? It was called the, the Freestyle. Yeah, so I had this pair of shoe, and it was great. I mean, everybody was wearing these things, man. They're kind of goofy looking, but everybody wore these shoes back in the day, back when Reebok came out, and they tapped into this aerobics kind of craze. Now, the fall and rise of Reebok. Now, obviously, in '81, early on, Shaq became a big promoter. They also had Allen Iverson back in '81. And so they were off and running, right? The other big thing they did was they got exclusive rights to make the uniforms for the NFL and the NBA. So they were doing that as well. They had a 10-year contract that was supposed to go to 2001. And even back in '85, another actress by the name of Sybil Shepherd, who was a part of a show called Moonlighting, which was very popular at the time. So she wore a pair of these shoes, red ones, at the Oscars one year. So again, that just tells you you've arrived as a brand when that started happening. Even after that, then they extended out and had a line for kids called Weeboks, Weeboks, which is kind of fun. And in '87, they bought 4 other shoe companies as well before kind of hitting the 2000s when things started changing a little bit. And flashing forward here a little bit, I don't know if you guys remember the pump, right? Reebok pump was a huge innovation for them as well. And again, was used by elites in basketball, and they had a lot of success with that innovation. So in '88, '89, and 90, they were number one, far and away the number one brand. Moving forward, they even had Dominique Wilkins and others. So they did what Nike ended up doing better. In '88, Nike kind of came on the scene, but even so, as late as 2004, 2005, Reebok was still kind of the top dog. And what happened was in '05, Adidas ended up buying Reebok. And that's when things change. So watch that video, I would say. But the demise of Reebok kind of came about because of that change. And there's a lot of theories that suggest that Adidas bought the brand and then didn't really do it and serve any good service. In fact, wanted to focus on the Adidas brand. So essentially kind of squelched the Reebok name. If you think about the contract they had with NBA and NFL, Reebok, the branding they had for 5+ years was suddenly set aside and replaced with Adidas. So Reebok really took a hit that way and a bunch of other ways as well, primarily because, in my opinion, Adidas didn't do a good job of promoting that brand. So you can see over time, this decline of the Reebok brand, which is where it's sitting now currently. Back to this piece here, this ad we just watched for Reebok UBU, which was an interesting sort of clever ad, but I would say not as deep of a dive as maybe this Nike commercial was, where just the first Just Do It ad, which is really an encouragement to folks to go out and do it no matter what it is, right? Whereas Reebok was more about being unique, which was not as much of a direct hit, particularly if you think about, where Reebok wanted to play, which was in different sports. And Reebok got pigeonholed as an aerobics brand in a lot of ways. So anyway, these deep insights, right? That's what we talk about here, and that's where I think Reebok missed the boat. Now, obviously, you could lay it at the feet of Adidas as well in a lot of ways for the demise of of Reebok rather. But excuse me, these insights are a key. So here's another graphic representation of what we want to do, and we'll talk about how you go about doing this using what's called laddering in a second here. But great insights reveal a deep discovery about the consumer of some kind, right? So here's the thing. People are going to always tell you, this is the issues iceberg I use in other classes, but above the waterline there to the right, that graphic, what people say they do, right, is often not really what they do. So below the line, that's what we want to do when we do this kind of research, right? We want to uncover those hidden truths below the waterline. So what people say they do is not always what they do. So what people actually do is different. And then way down deep is what we're looking for here, right? Down where the fishies are. Why do they do what they do? What's the motivation? Is really what we want to get to with these pieces of research here. I'm going to go beyond what they say to what really kind of drives their decision making. So I'll talk to you about how you do that. A couple more thoughts on this. What is the consumer insight? The reason why. What are the motivators? Like we're talking about here. Why do people do what they do? That's called motivation, right? What's their motivation? And there's different kinds, right? The low-level kind, which is secondary, and then there's high-level, which is more emotional in its basis, right? The ad here on the right, am I in the mood? Will it affect my cholesterol? Is it tasty? The family loved it that last time. All of these things here, I would say, are secondary or low-level pieces. What we're looking for are those consumer insights, those high-level motivators of behavior. We call those KCIs, or key consumer insights. And that's the primary motivator for which influences behavior the most. Again, using the Dove campaign for real beauty, right? Obviously, it attracts parents who are concerned about their kids and their body image, self-image, as one example of that. Here are some typical low-level motivators you'll get early on, and price is always the important one. That's why I would say don't fight on price unless you have to. When you're creating an ad, right? The price, you can go deeper and have more success. It's important, but it's not the most important thing. The product is available close by. Certainly being available is important, but again, it's a low-level motivator. Quality is very good. I like it. No other product works as well. Are all important, but they're all low-level. Now let's translate some of these to what could be high-level motivators of behavior, right? So on the left-hand side, again, the product is inexpensive. Now, asking questions, and we'll talk about how you ladder up to these here, but could uncover deeper truths about the brand. So to the right here, it validates my self-image as being a value-conscious person. A good example, this is Motel 6. They uncovered the fact that folks felt embarrassed for staying at Motel 6s, right? Because it was inexpensive, or some would call that cheap, right? So staying in a cheap place like Motel 6. So Motel 6 did some focus group information, and they found out that the best way to couch their product, their service, is by saying, hey, you made a good choice. It doesn't matter how much money you make. Selecting a place where you're just going to sleep for the night, as long as it's clean and has maybe a continental breakfast in the morning or whatever, all the things that you value shouldn't be embarrassing to you. And that was kind of a cool insight and drove Motel 6's decision-making behind their brand and their media plan and advertising and creative. That really helped them grow their brand in a big way. So that's one example. The product is available close by. Spending time with my family makes me feel like a successful parent. So in other words, if I don't have to drive 15 miles to go to, or I can buy it on Amazon, maybe that's, and have it delivered the next day, maybe that's a better solution for me. And that's another example, again, where, proximity is important, but what's the emotional quality driving that? The quality is very good. I only want to be the best in life as I am worth it. So again, that's a higher order emotional sort of response to quality. And that's how I feel about certain things. Like, for example, I always try to find cars that have or higher in quality. Now, I don't ever have the money to buy new ones necessarily, but I know a good quality car, as long as it's got some miles on it, but as long as it's in good shape, I will always pick the quality car over a brand new, less than quality car. I like it. Could be translated after some questioning. Others envy me. I become the center of attention. So liking things could be there could be a deeper quality to that. And no other product works as well. To the right there, I am the best, and I want to have the best. So these are all kind of translations from low-level motivators to higher level. Again, our goal here is to unearth these KCIs, or key consumer insights. What it helps you do is it puts a face on your target audience in a big way, right? Demographics are not enough. We talk about psychographics and advertising and marketing quite a bit, but that's really a deeper dive into our target customers. That's why I say in every class I teach in advertising, know your target audience like the back of your hand. And frankly, why we've done some of this branding stuff, this personal branding stuff, knowing yourself is a good start. How do you do it? Qualitative research methods. So focus groups, in-depth interviews, ethnographies, And other techniques that we'll talk about today here, laddering and projective techniques that get at some of these higher order key consumer insights. This is taken from what actually in a communication theory called means end value chain, or means end theory. We're not going to go into any detail on that. Obviously, there's other classes in communication you can take to discuss that, but this really is an iteration of that theory. It basically says that qualitative marketing and research techniques can lead to these higher order understandings of your target audience, and really does ladder up, right? So it takes, if you look at the orange piece below there, the orange graphic, it goes to the product attributes and it moves up the chain there, right? So you start asking questions specifically, and you ask them to drill down. You ask them to expand upon their answer. And they'll probably start talking about things like we've talked about, these lower order things, the product's inexpensive, et cetera, et cetera. But through your questioning, you're going to lead them up the chain here to these personal values and life goals. And that's kind of the goal here, right? Here's an example for a ski helmet with Bluetooth option. Now, one thing about this is there's two target customers here, right? You've got Billy and you've got Mom. In both cases, now cool helmet. Now, if you ski, obviously having the ability to communicate with your young ones on the slopes, especially if you're out west skiing in a big place, you want to keep in contact with them as much as possible. Now, obviously we have phones, but having a headset inside your helmet is an important feature for both Billy and Mom. For Billy, the feature is Bluetooth, right? The benefit, music, phone calls. The value end statement, which is more about self-esteem, right? Billy feels cool as he's shushing down the street, listening to his favorite music, and can make a call to his mom saying, "I'm hungry. Let's go get some food." Conversely, Mom, same basic feature set, Bluetooth, music, phone calls, but for her, she's got peace of mind knowing she can always locate Billy. Now, there's a product called 360 that my wife and I downloaded on the app. We get the same kind of feeling from that. Now I always know where my kids are 247, which is kind of getting at that piece, but that's more motivating to me than, frankly, almost anything else. So there's just two different ways to do this. And why would that be important to have Billy's take versus Mom's take? Well, obviously, Mom and Dad are probably going to be the ones who buy the product for Billy, ultimately, right? But maybe Billy will buy it too. Maybe he wants a helmet that really plays music, and he might be a target customer as well. But we have to kind of fashion our messaging to target both Billy and Mom so that we have the best success. All right, so we talked about laddering. I'm going to give you a couple examples here. This is a line of question. Now, normally when I teach this class face-to-face, I actually have somebody read the respondent as I play the moderator, but I'll read both to give you an idea how this works. Okay, so the moderator says, "What do you like best about your phone?" The respondent says, "Getting real-time sports scores." That's a feature, right? So again, we're low on the ladder at this point. Moderator says, "What is important about that? Why is that important?" "Well, I know what's happening right away." There's a functional benefit. Now we're moving up the chain, right? Moderator says again, "What does that do for you?" Respondent says, "Then I can tell my friends as soon as I know." So there's a higher benefit there. And again, we're getting at some of these higher order emotional pieces, which essentially says, I like to be in the know and I like to help inform my friends. It makes me kind of the special point of contact for my friends for all things sports related. Moderator says, does telling your friends right away, what does telling your friends right away do for you? Well, respondent says, "I am the go-to guy for sports. My friends expect me to know. It's what we talk about." There's an emotional benefit, and certainly you get a lot out of being the go-to person for all the latest updates on sports. Now, most people have that information these days, but again, this is one example where you can get to the higher order stuff. And what you do then with this information down here is, I'm the go-to guy for sports, could really inform a cool campaign around this emotional quality versus saying, getting real-time sports scores, right? Your ad would reflect this in a better way and do a better job for promoting the features and benefits of that product. So that's one example of laddering. The outcome characterized segment, sports authorities in the know, right? The sample copy could be, here's how I'd write this copy. Quote, "Be the leader of the pack, emotional benefit. Tell your friends about baseball scores before they know. Be in the know instantly while on the go. Get the X Sports phone. It's the only one with real-time XYZ scores." So that's really how these insight-driven discoveries can lead to the end result campaign or advertising message. All right, I'm not going to read all three of these. I'm going to read one here, and we'll give you an example of these. Here's this time for Tiffany. Now, Tiffany's, obviously, bracelets are expensive, as we know. So, obviously it's important for us to unlock why people pay that much more for a Tiffany bracelet versus any other bracelet, which, at the face of it, it's just about the brand. So the interview starts by saying, why do you wear a Tiffany bracelet? Subject says, I love Tiffany's jewelry. The interviewer says, why do you love Tiffany's jewelry? Subject, it's so refined, elegant, and delicate. So that's kind of a first clue there. It's refined, elegant, and delicate. Interviewer follows up with, why is that important to you? Subject says, when I wear it, I feel refined, elegant, and delicate. Interviewer says, then what does that do for you? Well, I feel very attractive when I feel that way. Interviewer then says, how do you know that? And the subject says, I have seen my husband looking at me that certain way. So the key consumer insight here is the subject wears Tiffany's as she values her partner's feelings for her. So that's really where the rubber hits the road here, right? So this is the symbiotic relationship between the husband and the wife. So there's two more here you guys can look at and different ways of thinking about this. This would also inform a different ad. This time, the subject says, every time I wear it, I notice admiring glances from men. I feel very flirty. That's another insight. And then here's a third one here. Every time I wear it, I am very self-assured and confident in my abilities. So in each case, you get these different insights about Tiffany's. So how do you know you have an insight, a key consumer insight? First step is identify all high-level motivators through laddering from various subjects. So a laddering technique, it's just really asking probative, deeper dive questions based on what they tell you. And really getting to the emotional part. And often the key word there is feel. How do you feel about X, Y, or Z? And that leads to that deeper understanding. Step 2, quantitative survey questions. How likely would you be to buy a Tiffany's bracelet if, on a scale from 1 to 5, so the Likert scale there, 5 being the most, 1 being the least. So that's another way to do this. That's in step 2. You were to get admiring glances from men. Your partner were to make you feel very special. And of course, the third one here from Tiffany's example is you were to feel very confident in your abilities. All three of those are important, insights. Let's talk about milk and then we'll wrap up here. This is a good example, again, of insights. Okay, so here's the breakthrough. A company called Good Bees flipped around the question, how do people feel? Again, there's that word feel again, when they're eating something that demanded milk to wash it down but didn't have milk in the house. And this, of course, Got Milk campaign is the results of that. But focus group respondents placed in the situation were upset. They felt deprived that they weren't able to do that, right? So that really kind of was the genesis for the Got Milk campaign. Backing up here quickly, the long-term declining sales for milk kind of precipitated this research, right? Milk Does the Body Good campaign was out there for a long time, but year over year you saw a decline in sales to the tune of 2 to 4% year over year. And so people were thinking, milk was not only maybe not healthy for you, but also was boring. So these nutrition-based themes weren't cutting the mustard, frankly, for milk. So they had to do some research, right? So here's how they kind of arrived at that. The insight, people who drank milk tended to think of it as an accompaniment to certain sweet and sticky foods that they loved. So blanket milk notion. So milk and cookies. We've heard that forever. People have talked about milk and cookies being therapeutic in a way. So tapping into that piece here a little bit further. And of course, we talked about the breakthrough already. And that's kind of how you do it, right? So asking questions of your target audience. And of course, what happened with milk was, as we know, one of the most famous sort of IMC campaigns around, the first example of IMC, they put ads outside of stores on billboards, and they were always featuring Got Milk with celebrities with a white mustache. And that was their Got Milk sort of campaign. And you had to have milk. Whenever you ate a cookie or any other sticky sweet substance, milk was a must-have. And of course, then you see this affecting people and how they perceive their purchase cycle, which led to increase in sales. And 2%, don't make no mistake, that's a huge number year over year. So milk kind of turned it around with this campaign. So a great example of how insight-driven research can drive positive change in brands. All right. That's it for this week. That's Insight Stuff. Make sure you read that article. Obviously, you got some things to do this week. Watch that episode of The Pitch with those two companies going after it. with Clockwork. That's the name of the company they're going for the business with. And we'll discuss that on the other side next week. You want to read chapter 3 in the Dickinson book, and we'll catch you on the flip side next week. Thanks.